and what you are doing in these days.
Thank you so much, Eric, and thank you for the honor of inviting me into conversation today. I'm so pleased to have a chance to speak to you and to connect with the people in your circles. It's an honor. I am joining you from Toronto, and I would like to share that Toronto is on the traditional territory of many diverse First Nations of Canada, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabeg, the Mississaugas of the Credit, and many Métis and Indigenous peoples whose land we are treaty people on. And I am in my basement office, as I often am during these lockdown days. We have serious COVID numbers right now in Ontario, and we're observing a lockdown in an effort to keep as many people safe as we can. So I'm coming to you from my basement, although in normal times, my job is as worship music and arts director is my title at East End United Regional Ministry, which is a urban near downtown, two campus, two location ministry of the United Church of Canada in Toronto, Canada. So that's where I'm coming to you from today.
Well, thank you very much. And I know that as I have just finished my defense and you are writing your dissertation, can you tell us something about what you are researching right now?
I would love to. Thank you. Yeah, and congratulations on your defense. I hope I'm not too far behind you. I'm a PhD candidate in musicology, studying music history at the University of Toronto, and my studies there examine what musical modernism looks like in the English British context of the 20th century, as that intersects and is in dialogue with the sacred. And the music of composer Benjamin Britten is my sort of entry point and case study to examine those intersections more closely as they pertain to that context and time.
Well, thank you very much. Fascinating. As you have talked about your journey, and you are mostly you're focusing on an Anglo-English context. So tell us your story or your inspiration. Why singing? Why music? Actually, why you are investing so much time, energy, resources, just becoming a musicologist? Although there is no great hope, we all know that we don't have great kind of a reception in even in the theological curricula. But what's your inspiration? What's your story actually?
Thank you. Yeah, I've circled around different aspects of church music and thinking about congregational singing throughout my life and my career. I grew up in the church. My dad is and was a church musician in the Presbyterian Church of Canada, and he always his name's Andrew Donaldson, and he has always modeled a kind of church musicianship that has a very open ear and takes very seriously the musical expressions of traditions that were not his own by training and inheritance, and wishes to engage in a spirit of learning and sharing a wide understanding of what it is to sing the story of a creating God and a creative God. So that was sort of my inspiration and what I took for granted as someone growing up in the church, in an urban Canadian context. And I went to theater school, was my first degree, but worked a little bit with Michael Hahn, enough for him to say, I would really love to see you go down this path a little further. And I ended up doing graduate study in church music, in sacred music at Perkins School of Theology in Dallas. And that really opened my vocabulary, opened my understanding of what it means to engage in church music ministry in a 21st century now context. And I come at church music, of course, from the position of a white woman, a Western person, an urban person, but it really is my hope to approach it as much as I try to bring learning and leadership to it, also to approach from a posture of learning and knowing that there are so many ways to praise and better get to know an infinite and loving creator. And I really hope to model that in the way that I engage with church music.
Well, thank you very much for sharing and such a great legacy, not only from your parents. And this is what we say, that the greatest gift which you can give to your kids is not what you bought for them, but what you invest inside them. And that's what the Hillary story, and that's what we are striving to do, to to give and to leave a legacy of what will remind them and keep them forever with them. So, Henry, while we were talking about congregational singing and diverse theologies, and you talk about Michael Horn, he's such a great scholar and a musician, and I have an honor to work with him and invite him to Pakistan, and he visited Pakistan with Dr. Emily Brink on my invitation, and such a fascinating journey and story when he reflected when he come back from his visit. And that's a fascinating story. We'll talk about Michael Horn's 7 streams, which you mentioned also in your article, and a great resource, especially so when we are talking about congregational singing and diverse theologies. Can you unpack these two terms? How you define congregational singing, especially in a realm and era where solo singing, solo performance, and a concert style where we have a one kind of a celebrity model slash singer is on the stage, and how can you define, and what is the importance of a congregational singing, and then how these congregational singing, they develop not only local theology but also diverse theology, which we call global or global, these two terms. Can you explain that, unpack for our listeners?
Yeah, thank you, Eric. There are so many ways to make a joyful noise when we come together in worship. And, I don't want to sound like I privilege one over the other, but I have a really strong passion, a deep passion for um, fostering the voice of the singing community and encouraging the people who come, whether we say in the pews, whether it's in the seats, whether it's, the people who are not on the stage or who are not sort of part of the designated leadership, getting everyone to use their voice when we come together to sing, and intentionally building into the experience of worship the techniques and the time that it takes to encourage that and to make it an integral part of what it means to come together in worship. So one of the things that I talk about a little bit in my article, but which I practice much more as a practice of my church music when I'm able to be with people in the same room, is to view the act of learning together in worship as worshipful in itself. So not to feel that, for example, learning, if it takes a little bit of time to unpack a piece, or if you need a little bit of technique to be able to sing a song fluidly and comfortably, not to leave that to the choir to only do that in choir practice or in band practice, but to engage that learning in the moment in worship, and to lead, myself as a leader. I use a variety of techniques to help the people in, is it the pews, is it the seats, whatever it is, to feel like they have the information they need and the support they need to join in singing, and not leave the task of singing to whatever group is in leadership, whether that's a choir. In my case, it would tend to be a choir, whether that's a worship band. Not that the choir and worship band aren't really important and wonderful aspects of worship to have, but to really put effort into drawing out, sustaining, encouraging, fostering the voice of the people of God, of the people who are there to join together in worship. Because the article that sparked this conversation today is about Advent in particular, and I think Advent is a particularly the season of Advent, the season leading up to the story of the Nativity and the Incarnation, the miraculous birth. All of these things have to do with incarnation and becoming human, becoming a body. And I think that's a particularly powerful metaphor for what music can do in the community, because we are invited into a space of singing together, of embodying and incorporating an act of singing together. There are people who talk about entrainment, the act of
So I think we lost connection again. I'm not sure, but until Hillary come back.
fostering that singing voice of the community does. So for me, that's what the practice of congregational singing, that's what makes me very excited about it, and of putting special energy into it as a practicing church musician. In terms of what that can do with our theology, with our understandings of I guess to put it in a really colloquial way, to me that says, what does what we sing teach us in worship about God? And John Thornburg, who I adore and has shared so much wisdom with me over the years, I remember him saying at one time, asking the question, what do we need to sing to become the people that God is asking us to be? And I think what my article is asking people to consider, particularly church musicians, pastors, people who think about what we sing in worship, is to say, are we singing from, we tend to sing from a relatively narrow canon of music that is likely wonderful, very special to a community, has a wonderful thing to say, a good word to share in informing us as a community. But what boundaries of theology does a narrow canon of singing form us for in our thinking of the limits of how we understand God, and therefore how do we understand our obligations to our neighbor and the best way to walk the path with Jesus? And what I'm suggesting is that one way of expanding our theology is to expand what we sing, because diverse song tends to bring with it diverse perspectives and diverse understandings of God and walks of life of Christians who are singing God's story. So to me, that's one way. It's not the only way, but it's one way to sort of push at the edges of what we understand God to be and how we understand our place in community.
Well, thank you very much. This is fascinating, especially as you're talking about the role of the worship leader or a choir leader is not to focus on himself, but also to facilitate actually the whole body, rather than putting him or herself in a limelight. It is actually the whole unified voice of the body of Christ which reached God's throne. And also not only the unified voice, but as well as when we talk about each song teach us a kind of an angle or a theology or an aspect or a character of God or the congregation or ourselves that we unfold. And I in my personal journey also, I see each song is a pilgrimage. It's kind of a pilgrimage. Start from some point and it take us to some point where we actually unfold, unpack, or experience something. Might be a taste of a divine, or I call it taste of transcendence, not only with the emotive music, but also through this text and both tune, how they work together. So while we are talking about these various aspects and these methods, so we all know that it's all rooted in scriptures. So my question is, as a scholar of musicology and then especially congregational singing, what did the practices of the earliest Christian songs looks like to non-Christian believers? Like what genres they were using, or what was their gathered practices which you have observed or studied, and what do you suggest, actually, what do you think about the early church practices as a gathered community when they were gathered together for worship?
Yeah, well, and I'm going to answer this question from, again, the perspective of someone who works in a mainline denomination church in North America, and I know that I bring that sort of baggage with me. But I think something that's really important to keep in mind is that the earliest Christian song was an existing body of Jewish song and prayer, and the earliest Christians were the Jewish circle around Jesus, who were forming what they understood the gospel to be, forming what it meant to be a community after the ministry of Christ. And I think it's really important to honor that heritage, not only of prophetic scripture, but also of song. And I mean, of all people, you have such a rich understanding of psalmody and of the heritage that we share across these faiths of the book of Psalms. And I think it's important to understand what we're rooted in, and that what we bring as modern Christians, which is also rich and important and inflected with our modern experience, stands shoulder to shoulder with a really deep, long-standing heritage of song and of praise of the Creator before we saw ourselves as Christians and before we understood what that meant. So, I if you don't mind, I would love to turn the question a little bit around to you and say, what, having just defended your dissertation, what would you like me to bring to my communities about the Psalms that I might not think about? What is it important for Christians who want to engage with the Psalms? And I wish my congregation, I'd like to do it more. We haven't deeply explored psalmody. I try to incorporate it, but I know that you think so deeply about the Psalms. And what should I maybe teach my congregation about the Psalms?
Okay, your teacher Henry is out now. Okay. So let me tell you. Well, while I was reading when we're talking about diverse theologies, and coming from a non-Western perspective, and coming from especially South Asian perspective, where we have a majority living in a Muslim context,
Yes,
and also some Hindu background, also some Sikh, all majority from Indian context, Sikh Hinduism and Muslim Islam. So these
yes,
three core basic the non-Western religion. I belong to that land, that area
exactly.
context, and they intervene all together. So the ideas and the concept, the cultural values, morality, ethics, and the social interaction, we all cross each other.
Yep.
That's number one, our cultural engagement. Then the linguistic, actually, the linguist terms which we use, and they also cross each other.
Yep.
The linguistic terms and the poetic terms, and the most important is the music, because we all draw from the same well. We all draw from the same musicology, from the same soundscape, whether you are a Muslim, whether you are a Hindu, whether you are a Sikh, or whether you are a Christian. So that's the same stream which you bring out everything. So another convergence point is, which I would see the topic concerning theology, is about the from my perspective as a missiology is my area of discipline.
Yep.
So missiological engagement through the convergence of the divine authority, divine kingship, then the ideas about having equality, justice, and most importantly, spiritual hunger. The spiritual journey, the pilgrimage, because they
Yes.
all three major religions have a concept of pilgrimage. Only Christianity stood out as a non-pilgrimage religion, because Jesus said, you don't need to go to Jerusalem, you have to worship, we worship in spirit and truth. So how that engage with the contextual theologies, where you have a special space and a geographical location to travel and to go and pay your homage, kind of these
Yes.
topics are there. So I think you need to set a time with me, another Zoom call to unpack this.
I think I do. I think I do. And thank you for letting me turn that question back to you a little bit.
Yeah, so that's how this contextual theology is diverse. And then if we talk about like in a South American and African context, we have liberation theology over
Yes.
there. And then we have also, like I talk about missional, then contextual theologies, then systematic. Yeah, well, systematic theology, it is a Western product, I think. You put which thing you put on the top, and then you come through,
Right.
certain
Yes.
stages. We are not like, we are cyclical. We go,
Right.
it's all intertwined. I
Hmm.
can't make chronologically or hierarchical theology that this is hierarchy, this is number one, this is number two, number three. It's all going
Yes.
round and round. So,
Yeah.
so that's what I think our contextual and theology. But anyway, today is your day, so I'm asking you questions. I think.
Well, and let me just pick up of what you were just saying, because you asked a moment ago about what do I mean when I talk about how what we sing can evince diverse theologies. And you just related to a cyclical as opposed to like a linear or a chronological sort of understanding of time, and a less hierarchical understanding. And that's one of the things that I talk about in the article and point to, again, borrowing from Dr. Hahn's um, formulation of things, is that some songs, many of the hymns that we sing, I was talking about Advent, but in my context, it's true of a lot of our hymns. They are they're stanzas, so they're poetic stanzas, and they're intended to be sung. You start with stanza 1, and then you sing stanza 2, and it has a logical argument that carries you through from beginning to end. And that's something that is very satisfying to a certain Western thinking mind, that, we appreciate the way that the logical argument is spun out. It's almost as if we were being convinced to be believers through rhetoric. And that's beautiful, and there's a rich body of hymnody that does that. But the cyclical idea that you just alluded to, I think is so important, and is maybe not so understood, at least by the Anglo-Western mainline stream of church that I have tended to work in and minister in, is this idea of song that on the page, if you're used to looking at something on the page, would look either very simple or perhaps repetitive, but that in practice, when sung in a body of people, is meant to be engaged with in a different way, and to ebb and flow, and to be almost become a prayer practice, become meditative, and it's cyclical in its makeup. And I think that is a way of sort of living out a diversity of not only of musical style, but of worldview, and of metaphysics, and of what it means to come together in
Well,
community
this
and
remind
sing.
me. This remind me another perspective. You might remember a few years ago when we Hymn Society have a title of Beyond the Page. You
Yes.
remember? So that was the theme, and that intrigued me actually. My cross-cultural, understanding and worldview, that we are from oral literate culture, which might be illiterate from Western worldview, because from Western point of view, a person who can read, or you can write something and you can convey in a script, that's how people, you fall in the category of a literate person. But
Yes.
the same things could happen in an oral literate culture, where we don't
Yes.
even need pages, because everything is in the memory and people sing
Yes.
by the oral practices. That's, I think, another angle or the perspective you add.
No doubt. So in that case, it's not a matter of going beyond the page, because the page has never been a stumbling block in
Yeah.
the first place. Whereas, in our Western context, it's an important practice to engage in the idea of going beyond the page, because we can be very dependent on what we can see, and what we can notate. And that has implications for how we worship. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
so as we were talking about now about the liturgical, and we talk about your article about Advent, and now because today in 2021, this date, we are now entered after Epiphany, and now we are entered in a Lent season going to enter through the whole God story we talk about, singing our story. So through the liturgical understanding and from the theological perspective, and how the whole liturgy has been designed and been imagined in a way that told the story. So my question is, what role did colonial and Anglo-European hymns played in shaping both global theologies and global liturgies? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to say there. And, I feel very aware that there are some, people with ethnomusicological training who would perhaps speak to this more eloquently than I will. But the role is immense. And, we're still, of course, seeing that play out. And the practice, I think, of trying to, again, in my North American context, wanting to engage with a diversity of music needs to be understood as part of the legacy of colonialism, and that, uh, colonists had a violent impact on the countries that they colonized, and they had a far-reaching multi-generational impact on the way people, first of all, understand faith, and also how they sing faith. And I think, there's a lot of directions we could go with this, but one way that I see that spinning out in my own context is that sometimes when I will want to share a song uh, from a different context, be it, a Caribbean hymn, or an African American praise chorus, or an African, a Cameroonian, Zimbabwean praise chorus. Sometimes often we're doing it in English translation, although sometimes we also do our best to sing in the original language, and the language that is sometimes used in I work in what is considered a very theologically progressive English speaking uh, congregation. The language of these hymns from places like Africa and the Caribbean. Now my congregation will say, well, I don't know about this language. It feels not theologically progressive enough for us. And, can we change this word or that word? Can we change this male language? Can we change this hierarchical imagery for God that is about throne? Or, can we change this atonement theology, et cetera, et cetera? And I think that it's very important to be specific and clear about your theology, and to understand it, and, be critical. But it's interesting to me to take that posture of critique to music that you are engaging with from places like, say, Africa or the Caribbean, when some of the theologies that we're seeing were brought there by colonists. So now we, in our progressivism, are turning around and critiquing, sort of the language that was brought over by us, the colonizers. So it's almost like colonialism is reaching out and touching behind the back. And I find it, to me, what I would prefer is for us to, again, in my Anglo white Canadian settler context, for us to engage with theologies, as long as they aren't, as long as they aren't harmful, to engage with them and say, we own that some of these theologies are because of the legacy of colonialism that our ancestors not shared, but enacted in the world. And it's important for us to own that and to not distance ourselves from it, because it's partly because of what impact we've had in the world. So I think there's a humility there that we can practice in, not only enjoying and engaging with hymnody from a diversity of places because it's fun. It's fun to sing things with different rhythms. It's fun to try the tabla. It's fun to, try different modes. All of that is legitimate and lovely, but I think it's also important to be anyway, for us in our context, to be realistic about the impact we've had on Christianity globally and to own it by singing it.
Well, thank you very much. This is fascinating story, and I really appreciate your humble the posture, actually admitting and relating with that. But that remind me another. It took me to another angle. So Toronto and Canada is now a great country receiving immigrants. And obviously, with immigrants, they are bringing their culture and music and songs and everything. And from my understanding, you have a large community from India and Pakistan in your South Asian community, and that they speak my language, they sing my music and everything. So I call it now the migration of a congregational music. There was a time when, like a British colonial, they brought to India something. But one interesting story, which is my observation, is that I'm not sure about any other context, like a Southwest Asia or the other parts of the world. I know they are heavily influenced by the Western colonial music and culture and everything. However, concerning Indian context, subcontinent, which is now India and Pakistan today, and Bangladesh also, my critical observation is that Western hymnody and Western music, they failed in that context. They never penetrated. Why? Because there was a deep down historical heritage of raga music and a contextual local music, and are
Okay.
already rooted in their bones and the bloodstreams. That was they were totally failed, and then they realized that our Western melodies and tune will not work there. So we have to develop now the local musicology and local repertoires and
Fascinating.
bhajans and local psalms and all. That's where the Punjabi Psalter came out, which is my my investigation. So that's an
Yes.
one. So my question to you: has your white Anglo English congregations, how are they receiving, or are they impacting by these immigrant communities, or are they sharing, receiving, and giving some crossing of the congregational music in your experience or in your context?
In my context, some, and I would love for it to be more. And, I think we're, for me, it's limited only by the desire to not be tokenist about it. And I really want to be cautious not to engage with these musics just as something like, oh, a checklist that looks good, let me take that product off the shelf and use it. But for it to really always spring from a place of relationship and a place of, you know uh to borrow a word that you just use, of humility and a posture of learning, because we, white Christians have treated the culture of the world as a commodity to be consumed. And there are so many ways that that has unfolded across the world, and there are so many ways that it has unfolded in our Christian communities and in our worship. And I am complicit in that as a white church musician. It would be impossible not for me not to be. It would be disingenuous for me to suggest that I'm standing apart from that. But what I can do is engage, I hope, honestly and with honor and respect, with musics that come from a perspective different than my own, a culture different than my own. And I hope that where I use it, it comes from um, having a relationship with someone like you and saying, I love to learn, the song. I'm sharing now a song that Eric Sarwar taught me, and he taught me how to sing it. And this is how I'm teaching it to you. And that's really important to me, that, of course, there are songs that I teach that I learned out of a book, and, that's that's the situation in some cases, but I do really try to put an emphasis on sharing music that represents a relationship.
Well, I think, well, yeah, I really appreciate, and I would like to recommend also and commend our brother and sisters in the Hymn Society also. You remember that last year, I think when we were in Ontario 2 years ago, there were a panel, and I was part of the team when we formed Repertoire. I think the resource for the immigrant communities, and there was a special
Yes.
team which we was established, and I'm still honored to be part of that team. And
And me as well.
yeah, so that's interesting. And well, concerning learning and singing, you are more than welcome to visit Southern California, our Indo Park congregations here, or you can come to Pakistan sometime, or
Oh, please.
a congregational, and to students, and to engage and learn lots of. Michael Horn was there, and he
I know.
so
I
you are
would
more
love
than welcome,
to.
by the way. So anyway, my last, I think second last question is, what methodologies you propose for making congregational music local and develop theology? Because that's interesting. I think someone asked me about our cultural theology and about the pastorate role concerning the developing theology, and I said, well, it's actually a one way to other. Because mostly musician and poet become pastor rather than pastor adopt
Hmm.
poet and the musicology, because our seminaries are still, we have a dearth of any kind of a curricular course on worship music or a church music in Pakistan. That's another struggle, and the part of this whole conversation is also to spark and to engage theological institutions and their committees, at least to have a one-term course on church music or worship or a congregational singing and all these kind of things. So these are part of my actually resources I'm developing for these courses. Anyway, so what methodologies do you propose to develop, and what's in your observation and practice? What you can tell other those who are watching?
Well, I mean, my practice as a church musician does draw on a number of styles of worship that come not from my local context, but rather from a variety of places we like to engage with the music, in the style of the Taizé community, in the style of the Iona community, as well as some of the song forms that we've talked about already today. So I approach it from that perspective, but I agree, it is so important to ask ourselves who are we, and what does it mean to be rooted in our local context. I think it is so important to support musicians in our midst, and to commission songs, commission lyrics, commission and not only to commission like anthems and solos, but commission songs that are intended to be sung by the congregation, commission new worship music, or provide an environment where, I say commission, it sounds like a very specific way of creating a piece of music, but provide an environment where new practices can emerge, where new music can emerge. One of the aspects of my practice is to work with a group called Music That Makes Community, and their reason to be is to uh, enable people to feel empowered to lead singing, to create music, to feel to break down the barriers in people's minds of what it means to be a maker of music. And they do really important work, I think, with making more people feel like they have something to say in terms of writing a song, writing a round, writing a worship, a chant. And I think a lot of really lovely music has emerged from their work that wouldn't exist if without that permission to say, you don't, just because you aren't the flashy worship band leader or the commissioned composer, not that we don't need those wonderful voices, but you don't have to be that to create music that is worthy of offering to God. And I think the more opportunity the more situations we can create where people feel comfortable to sing and to create music that we can share together in worship, I think that's a really wonderful thing.
Well, thank you very much. And at our concluding note, and before departing from here, there is a famous, I think, I don't know who said that, but in the history might be that Hillary. You can recall that one. And that person said that, let me write songs and I don't care about your theology. You know? So that was the power of song
Huh.
in a context. And there's also a belief that our what we what we sing, that's what we believe actually. And that's the phrase I think that comes from the Christian tradition, from a Latin tradition, lex credendi, lex orandi, or sorry, lex orandi, lex credendi, and then the additional is lex vivendi.
Right.
The liturgy and theology, we cannot separate them from each other. That's how they endorse, they develop, and they tease each other. They give the flow actually together. It's a fluid intersection. So what do you suggest and what do you propose, especially in those contexts where this discipline is not yet developed as an academic discipline? Why we need to develop that? What are the dangers if we do not engage with our liturgy and with our singing and the congregational involvement? And what if we don't have this one into our academic discipline in seminaries? What will be lost? What we are going to encounter if we don't prepare future leaders and pastors and the worship leaders to have this understanding and a grip on that subject? What do you think?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I've always really admired, again, Dr. Hahn. I've name dropped him so many times in this conversation, but he always said of the church music program at Perkins that his aim was to form theologically informed church musicians. And I always thought that was such a beautiful encapsulation of what the experience of studying there was. And at the risk of sounding, I'm wary of sounding like it's gatekeeping and that there's all this learning and you have to learn a certain number of things in order to be acceptable or good enough to be a church musician. And I'm wary of sort of sounding that way, but I think what is I think what's important about having a grasp of theology, having a grasp of the conversations that are going on around how we understand God, how we understand mission, how we understand the Holy Spirit, all of these things, is that for one thing, it's assumed, on a certain level that ministers will have that kind of training and knowledge. And it's one of the most the closest working relationship that a minister will have is with the church musician often. I mean, it's one of the most close relationships. So if you're going to engage with that in your career, I think it's really useful to have the kind of, to have a grasp of the kind of things that ministers come into their vocation having thought through and having thought about. I also think it's important because, at least again, so much of the vastness of the body of older church music comes from people who were extremely versed in theology, and the hymnody of Martin Luther and of the Wesleys and Watts, and these are deeply theologically considered hymns. And while that's not the only way to engage in creating church music, I think it can be a really valuable perspective, even just to know that it's out there, know what these people, where they were coming from, and why. Because it is so pervasive, not only in church music, but just kind of in culture and the way that it pervades, what a certain expression of Christianity is. I think it's really useful to have a bit of a grasp of that heritage. Also, because it's as much that you could then critique from a position of understanding, even if you don't agree. It doesn't have to be what forms you and you carry on in that tradition, but it's perhaps you feel that the church really needs to go in another direction, but it gives you that basis to say, no, I have this other idea and here's why. And I think that is really valuable on both sides.
Indeed, indeed. Well, thank you very much for your valuable suggestions and your proposals and your insights as not only as a practitioner, but also as a leader in a congregation, and also now as a scholar teacher on this subject. And we are so grateful for having you in our circles. And as Hillary in her last point in her last comment, shares that, and quoting Dr. Hong, our good friend and a senior teacher and professor, that we need to produce theologically informed church musicians. That's a task. And if we really want to develop our theology, which is culturally relevant, which is missional minded, and they are all in a part of this process. So churches, leaders, we really need to bridge between academic and artistic community. We really need courses. We really need curriculum. We really need future pastoral singers, artists engaging in and telling God's story, whatever gifts they have, and developing this godly, revealing God's truth through musicology, not only but other artistic aspects. So we appreciate and we thanks all your gifts, all your time, and try to bring potentially gifted and musically literate musicians and bring them together with theologians and scholars to tell God's story in your own context. You have a huge task to do in our generation. Thank you very much, Hilary, for your time and for your valuable insights, and also to our viewers, those who watch that program, and that will be available on YouTube also, and you can watch later on. Hilary, any last comment, say to students, especially to the student, those who future students, those who want to come?
I'm so grateful to have this opportunity to chat today, Eric. And to the students, I would say, we're in such a time when we are cut off from our typical ways of being in community together. And, that really takes its toll. But I so look forward to the day that we will sing together again. And I just hope that everyone is taking care of themselves and one another, and dreaming what the next verse of the church's song will be when we are able to continue on together. So I'm so grateful and honored to have this chat with you today.
Well, thank you very much, and God bless you. Thank you, and we are praying for your dissertation and your future endeavors, and someday looking forward to have you in Pakistan.
I really look forward to it. Thank you.
God bless you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
And you. Bye.